This program is brought to you by the Peel Hotel, proud sponsor of Bent TV.
Hello, welcome to the Bent-O-Rama series.
Hi, I'm Gwendolynne Burkin.
And I'm Michael Sue.
Tonight on Bent-O-Rama we'll be looking at the issue what binds us together. And indeed, is there such a thing as a gay and lesbian community?
The gay and lesbian community today has everything from exclusive restaurants, healthcare, shops, holiday resorts, plumbers, even a gay and lesbian pet care service. With such diversity in services, clubs and events, how can these groups sustain a common market? Why do gay and lesbian people choose to associate with other gay and lesbian people, given that the nature of this contact is not sexually based?
So I think the real question about community really boils down to, is there a community? I don't think there's a community. Okay, I don't think there's a gay community. I don't think that there ever has been one. I think that there is a gay world, and I think that we may have expressions of community that organize themselves around different things, like obviously around gay pride parties. There is community. Sometimes, you know, not always, around people ill with AIDS, there has been community.
Well, the Archives has been very interested in preserving as much of Australia's gay history as we possibly can, and in the period since Gay Lib there's been no problem because there's been so much written about homosexuality by not only the straight media but by the gay media itself, so that's been pretty well covered. But our biggest problem has been in the time before gay liberation, sort of finding out how people socialised, how they met, and generally just what gay life was like in that time. And we've had to confine ourselves pretty much to oral history.
There have been the mixed gay bars through the 50s and 60s, I think, and I know that a lot of lesbians went to those. The difference, again, with lesbians expressing their sexuality and also more choosing to form relationships and have the warmth and caring, perhaps more than the emphasis on just straight out sex as such. I think, as Graeme was saying before, that a lot of lesbians too, in the same way that the gay males did, formed friendship groups and had a lot of dinner parties, that kind of thing, because the bars, again, because of the emphasis on the role-playing with the butch femme very much, didn't always suit a lot of lesbians either. And so they preferred to form the friendship groups and have dinners with at each other's parties and that kind of thing.
From what we've uncovered in talking to people, there were networks of friends who met. They might meet initially, say, at a pub, have a drink, and then go on to a party and go out to dinner and things like that. And that was really interesting, learning about that, because one of the things that people don't realise today is that hotels closed at 6 o'clock. And most people didn't finish work until 5:30. And so you had the problem of racing to the pub for a couple of drinks before 6 and then finding out where the action was, whether there was a party on or a dinner or something like that. And that worked very well for certain types of people.
And out of women who'd been active in the gay liberation movement and the women's liberation movement, there was a group called the Radical Lesbian Feminists, who in 1973 organised the first lesbian conference down in Sorrento in June of 1973. About 80 lesbians went to that, and Chris Sitka, who went to that conference, has documented that quite well in terms of the kind of workshops that lesbians were discussing back then, and it's quite a historical phenomenon in that there was not another lesbian conference, specifically lesbian conference then, until 1984, I think it was, with the Lesbian Mothers Conference, and then not another national one until 1989. So it's a long time between lesbian-specific conferences.
Beats were very popular, as they are now, but probably they had more significance to gay men in the time before gay liberation, because for many of them it was the only way they could meet other gays. And there was a real, sort of, if you like, beat culture. And I mean, many of the beats consisted of parks or toilets, or they might be railway stations, picture theatres even, any place where men could meet.
I think part of the aspect is, as we were talking before, about why the beats were not popular for women, apart from the fact that it might have been an unsafe place for women to go at night and, you know, isolated places. Women's and lesbian sexuality is quite different to male sexuality, so that lesbians traditionally and on the whole have expressed our sexuality in quite a different way to how the gay men have expressed their sexuality, and that is true today as it was back then as well. So that most lesbians today would not find the beats an appropriate place to find sex or to express their sexuality, and lesbians generally are more about warmth and caring and forming relationships, I would say.
Sometimes what happened, some men always wanted to be on the beat scene. They didn't really want to mix socially in other settings. They didn't want to really go to bars, or they didn't want to go to parties or whatever. They were just happy to be active on the beat scene. So for some people that was the be-all and end-all. But for other gay men, meeting someone on a beat who could introduce them to a network of other gay men was much more important. And so once they met someone who introduced them into the scene, the beats became less important to them. There were quite a few people who became friends on the beat, and they might meet each other at the beat and just talk and socialise that way, and so their contact with other gay men was on the beat, although they didn't get off with them. There was quite a culture that a lot of the beat queens would meet and talk on the beat, but they'd never have sex with each other. And if other gay men turned up on the beat, or trade as they were called, they might have sex with them and then go back to their friends and talk some more, or go home, or whatever it might be. So the beat scene meant different things to different people, I suppose.
Yes. Well, certainly the Women's Liberation Movement Centre was a good place to meet other lesbians, because you knew that lesbians were in groups and activist groups through the centre. And other lesbians, and especially like lesbians who are a little bit more closeted, for example. Links was one of the early groups, and that's been set up for about at least, I think maybe going on for 20 years. I couldn't be absolutely certain. But that was a way you had to write off and say, or even now, you write off, say what your name is and a contact phone number, and then that you'll be contacted. And I think also through the 70s there were women lesbians who were prepared to be sort of like introductory services for other lesbians, sort of have a group where you could go along and meet other lesbians in that way. Again, it had to be very much of more of a friendship, kind of an informal, protective kind of an atmosphere, rather than the much more open and confronting way that a lot of gay males perhaps got together.
The beats that existed, say, in the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s, some of them are still around today, but many of them were in parks and so forth, and one of the features of a lot of the beats were that they were at the end of a pathway which was heavily had a lot of shrubbery or herbage around it. And of course that made it an ideal meeting place, because what would happen, one of the practices was that there might be 3 or 4 guys in the beat. One guy would agree to sort of keep knit, that is, he'd stand lookout while the other guys were getting off. And of course if anyone came along, because they had to walk along this path and you could see them from a mile off, and so you'd warn the other people in the beat, and so therefore there'd be no prospect of anyone being caught. But in the 60s, what happened, they had a clean-up campaign, and all the herbage was removed from a lot of these places. And of course that killed off a lot of the beets. And also the practice of keeping knit doesn't seem to be as much observed today as it was back then. And probably today it's more important than it was back then, because with the rise of bashings, gay bashings and so forth today, which really wasn't a feature of beat life back in the 30s, 40s and 50s. I mean, there were occasions when people got belted up, but it wasn't really a commonplace. And also police raids were nowhere near as common on beats then as they are today. Mainly I think because A, we didn't have as many police, and B, they didn't have cars. I mean, the very few police went around in cars. Most of them were on push bike. And you could tell a copper from a mile off because they all had these big helmets and so forth, and you'd hear them pedalling their bike, or you'd see this helmet in the distance, and so you'd stop whatever it was that you were doing.
The problem is that, you know, it's 1994, and how many years is it since Stonewall? I was at Stonewall, and the people who started the Stonewall riot were disenfranchised people. It was diesel dykes, it was black and Hispanic drag queens, it was little fag hag kids, you know, who were like tripping on acid like me, who went to the Stonewall because we liked to dance there and because we were accepted there, you know. And these are the kinds of people who started Stonewall are not acceptable to the kind of people who are in gay and lesbian task forces. And what you end up with is you have this definition of community coming out of a politically correct mentality of a kind of people who don't have tolerance for diverseness. Oh, they love to use the jargon, but transsexuals are out, bisexuals are out, you know, people are into leather or whatever. I mean, they're always cutting somebody out.
It is only until quite recently that gays and lesbians have enjoyed the freedom to live life as they choose. As recently as 1981, gays and lesbians in Victoria were considered criminals, punishable by law with a maximum prison sentence of 15 years hard labour.
Such changes don't come automatically. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication by political lobbying groups such as GLAD and ACT UP. These small groups of individuals work to secure the rights and privileges which are quite often taken for granted by the larger gay and lesbian community.
Gays and lesbians can still be fired from their jobs, refuse services and suffer violence, often without any recourse, because the Equal Opportunities Act in Victoria does not protect the basic human rights of gay and lesbian people.
Well, GLAD was originally formed with the primary purpose of changing the equal opportunity legislation in Victoria so that it would include lesbians and gay men, which it doesn't do at the moment.
Victoria was the second state and the first conservative state to decriminalise, and I think in a sense it was a lot easier than other states. I mean, Mardi Gras arose out of the struggle for decriminalisation in New South Wales. In Queensland you had Joe for 18 years, and a community united on the issue of decriminalisation. You had the Hamer government actually decide to put it through, and there wasn't a struggle to unite the community. Being legal did help the community come together and open new avenues. Bars, businesses were so much easier to associate. But I think on a political level, the community maybe hasn't been as strong down here because of that.
Gay liberation came to Australia in 1970 really. I mean, the Stonewall riots occurred in 1969 in New York, but in 1970 in Sydney, Christabel Poll and John Ware formed a group called Camp Inc. And Camp Inc. came to Melbourne, but it wasn't known as Camp Inc. down here. This was in 1970. It was known as Society 5. And Society 5 was an umbrella group. It was meant to be a social group, it was meant to be a little bit politically active as well, and a support group and so on. And Society 5 was very, very popular, very successful in doing what it set out to do. At one stage it had over 1,000 members, and it had a lot of female members as well, which was, in terms of groups that formed later, was quite unusual because the women tended to split off later on.
And I think the main difference that I see between the socialising aspects for lesbians and gay males is the political aspect. That I feel that lesbians on the whole over these last 20 years have been much more politically oriented, and probably because of this discrimination as women, that we're always aware that we're discriminated against, even though we haven't been under the law that the males have, you know, the gay males, but certainly under the law as women we're totally discriminated against. And I think that's lent itself to a much more militantly radically political aspect.
One of the things that people often sort of try to compare is whether gay people are closer together today compared to, say, 30 years ago. And I think that's very hard to answer, and I think you get a range of answers depending on who you spoke to. From my own experience, I recall the times when I first started doing the beat and so forth, which was long before the social scene developed, was that I quite enjoyed meeting people and talking to people on the beat, and I used to be quite happy with that. I wasn't looking for any more. It was quite acceptable. But certainly I know there are a much wider range of activities that people can engage in now, and people enjoy having friends that they might meet at a sauna, and different sorts of friends that they go to the pub with, and different sorts of friends they might go to dinner with. And so people have more choice today, and for some people that's important. They have different types of friends depending on the sort of social setting they find themselves in.
And in 1980, Pat Longmore and a few of her friends decided to set up or be the licensee of a pub in Richmond, which is the Kingston pub, and it became known as the Women's Pub. And that was the first time that we'd had a pub where we could go and be ourselves more, and a lot of lesbians went there, of course. And it was quite remarkable. It lasted for 6 years, from 1980 to 1986. At any time you could go there and know that lesbians be holding the front bar and be holding the pool table, which is quite a remarkable phenomenon, because we're coming from a historical perspective where in the early 70s women weren't even allowed into public bars, and there was a lot of action in the 70s to force the issue where women could go into public bars. They were a male-only space. You weren't even allowed to, you weren't served drinks in the public bar. And also it allowed quite a diversity of the lesbian community to meet there, so that predominantly the front bar might be held by the old-style bar dykes, maybe the non-political dykes, and then in the down in the dining room area be more the feminist dykes.
And what you're doing is you are fiddling while Rome is burning, because as you create your separatism, as you create your small groups, your cliques, your impossibility about who's queer enough, who's not queer enough. Oh, he has long hair. Well, that doesn't look, he should really cut his hair. Well, I don't know. I mean, she has long hair and she wears boxer shorts. I mean, she's confusing me, you know. She's not a real dyke. You know, all of that crap. Oh, they're bisexual. They're transsexual. Well, they should just identify themselves as gay. How can that be? I mean, how can you have people who have been oppressed their entire lives telling other people that they have to be one particular thing? Where is this coming? Who are you? Who are you?
When you consider the types of traumas that a lot of gays and lesbians have to endure through their childhood, and with their psychological development, for example, being rejected by the primary caregivers as they're coming out, your parents, being rejected by friends, having the church condemn them as saying they're sinful and they should be sent to hell, and a huge range of, I think, fairly significant negative psychological issues that arise for them. It's such a relief to be able to sit in a cafe, for example, and hold the hand of someone you're attracted to, or a lover or partner or whatever, and without fear of being rejected, without fear of intimidation by people who respond negatively, which usually happens out there. So there's a great sense of camaraderie, a great sense of togetherness, and I think on a psychological level, the support and the fact that there's that freedom of expression is very significant and very important. I think that if you look at it from a broader historical perspective, minority groups and subcultures tend to congregate together for a number of different reasons, including the fact that there's some level of harassment from the majority of people, and also the fact that they're within their own culture. There's a very real sense of freedom.
I personally don't think that there is a gay community as such. I think that we are bound together, if you like, by our sexual preference, but we come from all sorts of different backgrounds, we have all sorts of different political beliefs and moral beliefs in other areas and so forth. And although we might come together around certain issues or on certain occasions, I don't really think that there is a gay community.
Well, yeah, I guess we all use the term community because it's convenient, but I tend to use the word communities because there are many communities. There's the gay men's community, but even within that, there's obviously lots of different communities, yeah, and same in the lesbian community, yeah.
It's not so much the lesbian community as lesbian communities, because there are many aspects of lesbianism. And we can be just under the umbrella of the lesbian community, but within that there's lots of different aspects of the lesbian community, and I would say that that would be true too of the gay community and the gay and lesbian community, because we certainly come under the umbrella of the gay and lesbian community in terms of Midsummer or the gay Mardi Gras, gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, you know, and even here at the Gay and Lesbian Archives. But it's still, I wouldn't like to see at this stage anyway that there would only be the gay and lesbian community as such, that the differences have to be recognised and celebrated and worked around, as well as looking at the broader commonalities that we have as well.
This program was brought to you by the Peel Hotel, proud sponsor of Bent TV.